Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
Should you upgrade from the old Mercs to the new ones? Let's discuss. Starting with the price, we're at full retail. The Vapor 15 Elite is going to run you $260 and the Superfly 9 Elite is going to run you $285. Where at launch, the Vapor 16 and Superfly 10 Elite are both only available in this limited edition blueprint colorway, which does bear a premium, $275 for the Vapor and $300 for the Superfly 10, although I am told that both of these boots will drop down to their normal retail prices in the regular colorway releases, $260 for the Vapor and $285 for the Superfly. In other words, the retail prices have not changed. However, given that these older generation Mercurials are now discontinued, you're going to find that old stock will be marked down to clear it out. If you can get either the Superfly 9 or the Vapor 15 at a clearance price, that's obviously going to be excellent value for money. And just keep in mind that just because it's older doesn't make it a bad pair of football boots. These have been highly desirable for a year now. Nothing about the new ones changes that. And of course, if you're interested in any of these Mercurials, new or old, you can pick up all of them below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. As far as uppers go, this is where I would argue the biggest difference lies between the old and the new Mercurials, where of course the outgoing pair features their Vapor Posit Plus material, a super thin textile based synthetic that definitely trends on the raw kind of plasticky side, offering a little bit more of a rigid kind of structured feel on foot while still not lacking in overall pliability. It feels firm, especially out of the box. As you wear them in, it definitely softens up. And as far as surface texture is concerned, there's a little bit of texture from the actual textile base itself, but for the most part, in terms of additional grip on the ball, the only feature you have here is Nike's ACC All Conditions Control, which realistically is completely invisible, and we wouldn't know it was there if they didn't put the logo. So if you like more of a slick, raw, dare I say, plasticky sensation in terms of touch on the ball, that is what the outgoing Mercurial arguably does way better than the new one. Because what you'll find from the latest Mercs is tons and tons of extra grip, as well as a trend back into the Flyknit days of the Mercurial series. So for those that were really big fans of something like the Superfly 7 and Vapor 13, maybe even the OG Mercurial Superfly 4, this Nike grip knit upper in combination with the Flyknit across the top of the foot, as well as the Atom knit through the midfoot and heel area, really creates more of a sock-like sensation in terms of how these boots feel on feet. In terms of the thickness of the material, very similar to the Vapor Posit Plus of the model it replaces, but just significantly more pliable and generally just softer to the touch without adding any padding. But of course, it's that Nike grip material that you have across the front section of the boot that provides tons of extra grip on the ball that in comparison to the Vapor 15 and Superfly 9 simply feels sticky. Is there a sense of control that comes along with that? Absolutely. And if you're a fan of having a ton of extra grip on the ball, you're going to love the feel of this grip knit material. If you had a pair of Phantom GX 1s or 2s, you kind of have an idea of what to expect, although it's not quite to the same extreme. With that in mind, if you're not a fan of having additional grip, then you very well might not like the changes that Nike have made with this latest generation. Across the top of the foot, you're going to find a design element that appears very similar. Both boots feature an elasticated Flyknit material to create that one-piece enclosure with a nice deep central lacing system. The difference here is minor, but definitely worth noting, where you'll find on the previous generation, whether it's Superfly or Vapor, you're going to find that this elasticated Flyknit stretches, but it still maintains a pretty high level of tension, and when it stretches, it still remains completely solid all the way through. There are no holes for the sake of ventilation, or perhaps more importantly for a lot of people, to allow water to get inside of the boots, where on these new Mercurials, again, whether it's Superfly or Vapor, this section across the top top of the foot is not only thinner, but you can see when it stretches, there are giant holes, which do allow for some nice breathability across the top of the foot, but it also allows water to get inside of the boots. Regardless, if it's super wet, your feet are going to be wet in either of these, but certainly when water is present, it enters the new Mercurials easier than the old ones. Talking specifically about the mid-cut Superfly variants, you can see there definitely are some design changes to the collar itself, where I think with the Superfly 9, we saw the same thing we had been seeing with the Superfly series, where they've actually lowered the collar slightly. It has a little bit of like a forward leaned angle to it in terms of the opening, and for the most part, not that it's not relevant to the overall feel and performance, but I think they definitely made the collar less noticeable than it was when it was first introduced on the Superfly 4, where you can see on this new Superfly 10, it's basically the return of that Superfly 4 dynamic fit collar, where it's pretty much just the same design all the way through, cut straight at the top, lifting a little bit higher, and you can see there is a slight difference in where they've stitched it. It's directly at the back on the old one and it's slightly off-centered on the new one. I don't think that really makes for that much of a difference. I will argue that the inside heel liner on the new Mercurials has that little bit of extra padding that I think feels more comfortable, and realistically, I wouldn't say that there's a tangible performance or feel difference between these two collars, but the fact that they have raised the collar height on this new model, I think is something that a lot of people who are into the mid-cut Superfly thing will probably appreciate. And then as for the vapors, not much has changed between the old and the new. You have a little bit of extra material at the very back and a little bit more of a pointed shape where the tongue itself actually ends. But for the most part, if you wore the Vapor 15 and liked the overall cut, you're getting more of that with the Vapor 16. When it comes to sole plates and stud patterns, despite looking drastically different, I don't think they actually feel drastically different, where obviously this previous generation of Mercurial was the first to introduce that 3/4 length zoom unit. That is still present on the new model, and the design of that element itself has not changed whatsoever. However, because of the design of the sole plate on this previous generation Mercurial, you do get that bounciness from the zoom unit that I would say feels most noticeable kind of along the outside edges of the boot where the studs themselves are actually present, where basically that's the one spot on the zoom unit where the most pressure is being applied, which really gives you this nice sensation of underfoot cushion. And I don't want to use the word stud pressure, but it is that stud pressure that makes the zoom unit itself feel super noticeable on these boots. I would definitely view it though as more of a comfort element more than anything. Where you can see the design of the sole plate on the new Mercurials features this kind of rippled effect for center studs running through the middle of the forefoot, where you have these little raised sections that aren't significant enough to really provide much in the way of traction, but they are still going to make contact with the ground when you're actually playing in the boots. And what that's actually going to do is create more even pressure across the bottom of the foot, even though these longer studs are going to be the main points of pressure. And the end result is that the very same 3/4 length zoom unit feels more consistent in terms of its cushion across the entire forefoot rather than being focused more so on the outside edges, which I would argue is better in the sense that the boots as a whole underfoot feel extremely comfortable. You're getting that impact protection from the zoom unit that you really won't get from any other football boot other than the previous generation Mercurials. But I also think that because the pressure itself is more evenly distributed, the actual sensation of the zoom under your feet does become a little bit less noticeable. As far as traction is concerned, despite these two stud patterns visually being very different from each other, you can see when they're actually side by side, the layout's not that different. You have 4 studs under the heel, you have 4 main studs in the forefoot, 2 toe pick studs right at the end, and some support studs running through the middle of the forefoot. So in turn, you end up with 2 very aggressive stud patterns made up of mostly bladed studs, where on the old generation, they were pushing this 3-sided bladed shape for these 4 main studs, and the traction it provides is super aggressive, as we've always had from the Mercurial series, where on the latest generation, they've reverted back to these kind of chevron bladed studs originally introduced on the Vapor 11 and Superfly 5 that a lot of people really liked, and surprise, surprise, it still feels fantastic on this new model. In terms of outright grip, Tons of bite in every direction from both of these. I really think it's a matter of splitting hairs, and the suggestion that one is significantly better than the other, I don't think would be a fair one to make. They're easily two of the best sole plates and stud patterns if you want something that feels responsive, unique, and with super aggressive traction. When it comes to weight, as I always say, this scale does not lie. New versus old, let's see which ones are lighter. Both in the same size 9.5 US, we'll start off with the Superflies. The outgoing Superfly 15 Elite weighs in at 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 193 grams, where you can see the new Superfly 10 Elite weighs in at 6.95 ounces, the equivalent of 197 grams. Where the Vapor 15 Elite weighs in at 6.6 ounces, the equivalent of 188 grams, change the scale back to ounces, and you can see that the Vapor 16 Elite weighs in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 189 grams, which is a weight difference, depending on the model, of 1 to 4 grams in favor of the old ones, meaning that the Superfly 9 and Vapor 15 Elite are technically that little bit lighter than the new models that replace them, but realistically, are you going to be able to feel 1 to 4 grams on your feet? Probably not. On feet is where you're really going to notice a big difference between the old and new Mercurials, where I do think there's going to be a lot of people that will think the new ones feel a lot better, but at the same time, comfort is not one of those things that everyone agrees on. Some people like the firmer, slightly stiffer, more structured feel that realistically is what the Mercurial series was kind of built upon, and that is something that I think the old model in the Superfly 9 or Vapor 15 does extremely well. It's a tight-fitting boot that squeezes your foot in a way that isn't necessarily uncomfortable if you like the feel of that, but also does a really good job of holding your foot in place and just generally feeling super locked in. And that's not to say that you don't get a tight-fitting, responsive feel from the new Mercs, but this grip knit material definitely has more pliability to it. It's not quite as structured. It's definitely not as rigid. And in turn, it just feels a little bit softer and more sock-like. Again, kind of relating it back to a broken-in pair of Mercurial Superfly 4s all the way back from 10 years ago. So that really is the major contrast between these two in terms of fit and feel. There are also other subtle changes like the heel liner, which looks very similar, but the new one just has a little bit more padding that I personally think feels more comfortable. And then again, the sole plate, where they have the same zoom unit, you just notice it a little bit less on the newer model, but still have great underfoot cushioning, and as a whole, the boots are very, very unique to the feel underfoot compared to just about everything else currently on the market. So I can't say that the Zoom or the sole plate feels better or worse on the newer one or the older one. Both just feel really, really good to me. From a width and shaping perspective, they haven't changed a lot going from the old one to the new one. It's still relatively slim all the way through. Obviously, they're not so narrow where you have to have super slim feet to wear them. I think if you've worn Mercurials in the past, you should fit in the latest ones. At the end of the day, while the goal is a tight overall fit, Nike isn't trying to alienate their customer base. They're making these to fit most people. So as long as you like that tight overall fit, both of these should work in terms of width, but obviously if you also have super wide feet and don't tend to fit in a lot of football boots, these might not be the best choice for you. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So new or old, regardless of which one you're interested in, I would strongly recommend going true to size. And as far as the Superfly Vapor situation is concerned, obviously these are the mid-cut Superflies on feet. The collars feel pretty well the same despite being a little bit different between new and old. But basically, if you like the mid-cut collar, go for the Superfly. If you don't really need it, save the money and go for the Vapor. There is absolutely no difference in fit, feel, or performance between any of them though, whether you go for the new ones or the old ones. So in conclusion, should you upgrade from the old Mercurials to the new ones if the overall goal is better performance? I would be straight up lying to you if I told you that I thought that the new Mercurials performed better than the old ones. This was an industry standard for the year that it was current, if not a little bit longer than that. And while they have more or less changed almost every element on this new model, when you compare them side by side, realistically, the traction is the same, the shaping and fit is similar, the comfort I would argue is better, but that's not necessarily a performance element. The preference of more grip or less grip is just that, more of a preference rather than a true performance benefit. The overall weight is the same, the air zoom unit is the same, the traction is the same. There really isn't much between them when you're talking about the elements of a football boot that impact how they're going to perform. In other words, if you currently have the Superfly 9 or Vapor 15 and you like the more raw, rigid, kind of plasticky feel of the Vaporposit Plus upper and have no desire for extra grip on the ball, I'd strongly advise you to go buy another pair while they're on sale and still available, because what's on offer from the new Mercurials, while a very similar overall recipe, it does again trend back towards the Flyknit days of the Mercurial series in the Vapor 13, the Superfly 7, the Superfly 4 that so many people really liked. But then there's the curveball of the extra grip from that grip knit upper, which I really like, but I don't necessarily think is going to be for everybody. And the fact that it is such a new thing on the Mercurial series, I think it will overall be pretty well received, but longtime fans of the series might be thrown off a little bit because it does feel distinctly different than anything we've had in the past from this line of football boots. If you have the current Mercurials, really like them, but wish they were a little bit softer and offered more grip on the ball, then by all means upgrade. I think these new ones are gonna be exactly what you're looking for. If that's not the case though, don't feel like you're missing out.